Be me Jacoby, a game dev in my late 20s. Not a massive AOA studio, just a small, passionate indie team. There were about a dozen of us, and we'd just shipped our first big title. A fantasy RPG that actually did pretty well for itself. Got good reviews, built a small but dedicated community. For the first time in my career, I wasn't in a state of constant anxiety about layoffs. The vibe in the office was perfect. We were a well-oiled machine. You had Easton, our lead programmer. The guy was a wizard, a quiet older dude who had been coding since before I was born. If you had a problem you couldn't solve, you went to Easton. He'd stare at your code for a minute, hum to himself, and then point out the one misplaced semicolon that was ruining your life. A legend. Then there was Tony, our junior dev and QA guy. Younger than me, full of energy, always eager to learn. He was the one who would find the most obscure bugs, the kind you could only trigger by jumping backward 3 times while casting a specific spell on a Tuesday. On the art and writing side, we had Myra and May. They were genuinely talented. Myra's concept art basically defined the whole look of our game, and May's writing gave our world depth. We all got along, no drama, no office politics. If there was a critical bug, we'd all stay late, order some pizzas, and crush it together. Tasks were assigned based on one thing and one thing only: who was the best person for the job. It was a meritocracy, a beautiful, functional meritocracy. And then she arrived. The higher-ups, the publisher suits who funded us, decided we needed more structured leadership to handle our newfound success. So they hired a new project manager for us. Her name was Ivana. She walked in on a Monday morning, sometime in the spring, I think. She had that specific look, the kind of person who has a lot of opinions, but zero experience in the actual field they're managing. Her introductory meeting was the first red flag. We all gathered in the conference room, expecting to talk about the roadmap for our next DLC. Instead, we got a 45-minute TED Talk about corporate culture. She used every buzzword in the book: synergy, paradigm shifts, fostering inclusivity, creating safe spaces. She said her goal was to deconstruct the traditionally toxic male-dominated power structures in game development. Easton, Tony, and I just sort of looked at each other. Toxic? We were the most chill team I'd ever worked with. We didn't have power structures. We had a workflow. May and Myra seemed to eat it up, though, nodding along, looking very serious. Ivana didn't ask a single question about the game's engine, the codebase, or our development pipeline. Her entire focus was on the dynamics of the team. The first week she didn't do much, just observed. She'd walk around the office watching us work, taking notes on a little tablet. It was unsettling. Then the changes started. It began with task assignments. Previously, our old manager would just post tasks on our project board, and we'd grab what we were best at. Easton would take the complex architectural stuff. I'd handle gameplay features. Tony would hunt bugs. And Myra and May would do the art and writing. Ivana put an end to that. From now on, she would be assigning all tasks directly. The first new project was a small content patch. New cosmetic items for players. Ivana called a meeting. "Okay, team," she said with a big artificial smile. "For this next sprint, I want to leverage our team's diverse talents in a more equitable way." She turned to Myra and May. "Ladies, I want you two to take the lead on this. I want you to brainstorm and design a whole new set of beautiful, empowering outfits for our female characters. Let your creativity run wild." They were thrilled. It was a fun, creative task with a lot of visibility. Then she turned to us. "Jacoby, Easton, Tony. While they're working on the creative vision, I need you 3 to focus on the technical back end. There's a long list of minor bugs in the backlog. I want you to go through and clean them up. It's crucial foundational work." We didn't think much of it at the time. Sure, bug fixing is tedious, but it has to be done. It seemed like a reasonable division of labor for that specific task. So, we spent the next 2 weeks digging through a mountain of old bug reports. Stuff like NPC's beard clips through his helmet, or the sound effect for walking on gravel sometimes plays when you're walking on wood. Mind-numbing, thankless work. Meanwhile, Myra and May were having a great time. Sketching cool armor sets, laughing, putting on music. Their side of the office was full of energy. Ours was dead silent, just the clicking of keyboards and the occasional sigh of despair. When the patch was ready, Ivana presented it to the higher-ups. She spent 10 minutes showing off the new cosmetic designs, praising Myra and May for their brilliant artistic contributions. Our work, the hundreds of bugs we fixed that actually made the game more stable, was summarized in a single bullet point on the last slide. General stability improvements. That was the first time I felt a sting of real unfairness, but I told myself I was overthinking it. It was just one project. It wasn't. This became the pattern for everything. The next big task was planning our first major DLC. Another meeting, another big smile from Ivana. She announced that Myra and May would be in charge of the entire narrative and conceptual direction. Their job was to write the story, design the new characters, and create the concept art for the new world zone. "I want this DLC to be a testament to the female creative voice," she declared. Okay, fine, they were good at that stuff. What was our job? Ivana told us that the game's engine was inefficient. She wasn't wrong. It was built on old tech, a bit of a Frankenstein's monster of code. Our task was to optimize the core engine. Anyone in software development knows what that means. It means descending into the deepest, darkest circles of code hell. It means spending weeks, even months, rewriting ancient, undocumented code, praying you don't break everything in the process. It's the riskiest, most stressful, and least visible job in game development. You don't get a fancy art portfolio out of it. If you succeed, nobody notices. If you fail, the entire game collapses. So, while the women were storyboarding epic quests and drawing mythical creatures, we were tracing memory leaks and refactoring thousand-line functions. The atmosphere in the office completely changed. It was no longer one team. It was two. There was the creative team, Myra and May, who got to do all the fun, rewarding work. And there was the technical team, OS, who were treated like janitors, expected to clean up all the messes behind the scenes. Ivana reinforced this constantly. She'd walk by our desks and say things like, "Keep up the great work, guys. That solid foundation you're building is so important." It was condescending, like patting a dog on the head. Then she'd go over to Myra and May's desks and spend half an hour gushing over a new character sketch. Myra and May, to their credit, seemed a little uncomfortable with it at first, but they weren't exactly complaining. They got to do the best work, got all the praise, and had none of the pressure. They started to internalize it. They'd talk about their DLC, their story. We weren't part of that vision. We were just the plumbers making sure the toilets flushed. The frustration was building up, especially in Tony. He was young and passionate about making games, not just debugging them. He had ideas for gameplay mechanics, for cool features. Whenever he tried to bring one up in a meeting, Ivana would shut him down. She'd give him a patient little smile and say, "That's a great thought, Tony, but let's stay focused on our core technical responsibilities for now." He was being pigeonholed. We all were. The breaking point came during a particularly bad week. We were in the middle of a massive server migration, a project Easton had warned would be a nightmare. We were working 12-hour days. The office was littered with empty coffee cups and takeout containers. One afternoon, Ivana called an emergency meeting. We dragged ourselves into the conference room, expecting some new crisis. Instead, she projected a social media analytics page onto the screen. "I just wanted to share some wonderful news," she said, beaming. May's latest concept art post on Twitter has broken our record for engagement. The community absolutely loves the direction she's taking things. We just stared at her. We were running on fumes, fighting fires in the server room, and she called an emergency meeting to celebrate a tweet. Tony actually snapped. He didn't yell, but his voice was shaking. "That's great," he said. "Meanwhile, the authentication server has crashed 3 times this morning, and we're losing player data. We've been telling you for weeks that we need to upgrade the hardware." The room went silent. Ivana's smile vanished. She looked at Tony like he was a cockroach that had just crawled onto her desk. "Tony," she said, her voice dangerously calm, "I understand you're under pressure, but that tone is not productive. It's a classic example of toxic masculinity in the workplace. Trying to diminish a female colleague's success because you're feeling stressed." My jaw dropped. So did Easton's. She was actually framing a legitimate technical crisis as an attack on women. Tony was speechless. He just shook his head and walked out of the room. That evening, the three of us went to a bar near the office. It was the first time we'd really talked openly about what was happening. Tony was devastated. He was convinced he was going to be fired. "She's trying to make us fail," he said, staring into his beer. "She gives us all the impossible tasks, no resources, and then blames us when things go wrong." He wasn't wrong. I was feeling a deep sense of betrayal, not just by Ivana, but by Myra and May too. They saw what was happening. They saw us being buried under an avalanche of grunt work while they got to do the fun stuff. And they never said a word. They just accepted their privileged position. It felt like the whole social contract of our team had been broken. We had been a unit. Now we were a political battlefield. I vented for a while. Tony brooded, but Easton was just quiet, slowly sipping his drink. Finally, after we had both run out of steam, he spoke. "She's playing a different game," he said, looking at us. "She's not trying to make a good video game. She's trying to win a political argument, and we're the pawns." He was right. Her goal wasn't to ship a successful product. Her goal was to create a narrative, a story she could tell her friends and put on her resume. The story of a brave feminist manager who transformed a toxic male space and empowered female creators. The actual quality of the game was secondary to that. "So, what do we do?" I asked. "Go to the director? It's her word against ours. She'll just say we're a bunch of disgruntled guys who can't handle a woman in charge." Easton shook his head. "No, we don't complain, we don't argue, we don't get emotional." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "We do exactly what she tells us to do, and nothing more." Tony and I were confused. "It's called malicious compliance," Easton explained, "or work to rule. Right now, we're killing ourselves to hold everything together. We're working overtime, we're taking initiative, we're fixing problems before she even knows they exist. We're enabling her. We're covering for her incompetence." He took a drink. "We stop. We do only what is explicitly stated in our written job descriptions and in her emailed instructions. No more staying late. No more proactive problem solving. We clock in at 9, we clock out at 5. If the server is on fire at 5:01, it burns until tomorrow morning. Every request, every task, we demand it in writing. We will build a paper trail, a detailed, undeniable record of her mismanagement." A slow smile spread across my face. It was brilliant. It was a plan that didn't rely on confrontation or emotion. It was cold, logical, and professional. We weren't sabotaging anything. We were simply following the rules. Her rules. We would give her exactly what she wanted. A team where the men just handled the technical foundation. And we would let her deal with the consequences when she realized that the foundation was the only thing holding the entire house up. Tony's eyes lit up. For the first time all night, he looked hopeful. "When do we start?" he asked. Easton finished his beer. "Tomorrow morning." The next day, the atmosphere was different. We walked in, not with dread, but with a quiet sense of purpose. The first test came before lunch. Ivana walked over to my desk. "Hey, Jacoby," she said, in her usual overly familiar tone. "I was thinking it would be really cool if we added some dynamic weather effects to the new zone. Could you whip up a quick prototype for me to see?" This was a classic Ivana move, a casual off-the-cuff request for a feature that would take weeks to implement properly. Normally, I would have sighed and just started working on it, adding it to my mountain of other tasks. Not today. I looked up from my screen and gave her a polite, professional smile. "That sounds like an interesting idea, Ivana. Could you please send me a formal task request via email with the detailed specifications? I'll need to add it to my current sprint backlog and assess its impact on my existing deadlines." Her smile faltered for a second. She wasn't used to this. She was used to just giving orders and having them followed. "Oh," she said. "Well, it's just an idea. Just wanted you to play around with it." "I understand," I said, keeping my tone perfectly neutral. "But to properly allocate my time, I need all my tasks to be formally documented, as per our new structured workflow." I had used her own buzzwords against her. She stood there for a moment, thrown off balance. "Right, okay, I'll do that," she stammered and walked back to her office. Of course, she never sent the email, because she didn't want a paper trail of her asking for massive, unplanned features. Easton gave me a subtle nod from across the room. Round 1 was ours. The next few weeks were a masterclass in passive resistance. Every verbal request was met with the same polite, "Please send that to me in an email." We stopped working through lunch. At 5 p.m. sharp, we would save our work, lock our computers, and walk out the door. One evening, as we were leaving, a critical bug came in that crashed the game for a whole segment of players. Ivana ran out of her office in a panic. "Guys, wait! The game is broken. We need to fix this now." Easton just looked at his watch. "It's 5:05, Ivana," he said calmly. "Our workday is over. We'll look at it first thing in the morning." Her face was a mixture of disbelief and fury. "This is an emergency. You can't just leave." "Our contracts don't stipulate mandatory overtime for production emergencies," Easton replied, without missing a beat. "If you'd like us to be on call, we can discuss getting that formally added to our employment agreements with new compensation terms." She was so angry she couldn't even speak. We just turned and left. It felt incredible. It was like we had taken back control. Ivana's management style completely depended on us being compliant, hard-working guys who would quietly clean up her messes. By refusing to do that, we were exposing the cracks in her system. The game's stability started to suffer. Minor bugs weren't getting fixed as quickly. The community started to notice. Myra and May were still off in their own world, designing beautiful things for a game that was slowly becoming unplayable. They were completely insulated from the technical reality of the project. Ivana tried to put the pressure back on us. She scheduled more meetings, demanding to know why our velocity had decreased. In each meeting, Easton would calmly pull up our task list, which was now meticulously documented via her own emails. He'd point to the screen. "We are completing the tasks you've assigned us, Ivana. However, as we've noted in these emails here, and here, and here, the technical debt is accumulating. Without dedicated time to address it, performance will continue to degrade." She had no answer. We were using her own documentation to trap her. Her narrative was falling apart. She couldn't paint us as lazy or incompetent when we had a perfect record of completing every single task she had formally assigned us. And she couldn't blame us for not doing work she never assigned. Her frustration grew. She became more irritable, more paranoid. She started trying to micromanage us, demanding hourly updates on our progress. We complied, of course. We flooded her inbox with detailed, jargon-filled reports every hour on the hour. She had created a bureaucratic monster, and now it was eating her alive. All of this was leading up to the big one, the deadline for the new DLC she had promised to the community and the publishers. The DLC that was built entirely on the creative vision of Myra and May, and that we had warned her, in writing, was technically unfeasible without a major engine overhaul. An overhaul she had explicitly denied us the time to perform. As documented in a very specific email that Easton had saved in a special folder, he named the receipt. The day of reckoning was approaching, and for the first time in months, we weren't afraid. We were ready. The week of the DLC launch arrived. A weird, tense quiet settled over the office. It was like two different companies sharing a space. On one side, you had Myra and May, who were basically in celebration mode. Their work was done. They had created the art and the story, and in their minds, the hard part was over. They were buzzing with excitement, planning social media campaigns to promote their DLC. On our side of the office, it was like a submarine preparing for impact. We were quiet, methodical, and focused. We spent our days methodically clearing the low-priority bugs Ivana had assigned us, all while the massive looming iceberg of the DLC integration waited. On Tuesday, Myra and May sent over the final assets in a neat little zip file. It was full of high-resolution image files, text documents with the script, and spreadsheets with item descriptions. It was, for all intents and purposes, a folder of pretty things. Ivana forwarded it to us with a one-line email. "Implement these assets for Friday's launch." Easton took the file. He didn't say a word, just started the process of trying to stitch it all into the game's engine. It took less than an hour for the whole thing to catch fire. Metaphorically, of course. The new character models had 10 times the polygon count our engine was designed to handle. Loading them into the main game world caused the frame rate to drop to single digits. The new quest scripts were calling for functions that didn't exist, causing them to crash the moment you tried to interact with an NPC. The new zone they'd designed was beautiful in the concept art, but it was a technical nightmare. It was full of complex geometry and lighting effects that would have required a complete rewrite of our rendering pipeline. It was exactly what we had predicted, but 100 times worse. It was like someone had handed us the blueprint for a skyscraper and told us to build it on the foundation of a log cabin, using only toothpicks and glue. We spent the rest of the day documenting every single critical failure. We didn't try to fix them. That wasn't the plan. Our job was to assess, document, and report. By the end of the day, we had a multi-page document, complete with screenshots, error logs, and performance metrics. It was a detailed, technical, and utterly damning report on the state of the DLC. Easton wrote up the email to Ivana. It was a masterpiece of professional, blame-free language. It started with, "Following your directive to implement the new assets, we have completed our initial integration pass. The following critical issues have been identified." It went on to list the top 10 game-breaking bugs, each with a technical explanation of why it was happening. It concluded with, "Our assessment is that the DLC in its current state is non-functional and cannot be released. To address these core architectural conflicts, we will require a minimum of a 1-week delay to begin a full refactoring process. We are on standby for your instructions." He attached our report, CC'd the director, a crucial move, and hit send. Then we packed our bags. It was 4:59 p.m. As we were walking out the door, Ivana stormed out of her office. She was holding her phone, her face pale with rage. She had read the email. "Where do you think you're going?" she demanded. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the quiet office. "We're going home," I said. "It's 5 o'clock. "You can't leave. You just sent me this disaster report. You have to fix it." Easton stopped and turned to face her. He looked completely calm. "There is nothing to fix, Ivana," he said, his voice even. "The work cannot be fixed. It needs to be redone correctly, as we have advised for the past 2 months. We are awaiting your authorization to delay the launch and begin that work tomorrow." "Delay?" she almost shrieked. "I have already told the publisher it's launching on Friday. I've told the community, you will stay here tonight and you will make it work." This was the moment, the confrontation we had been building towards. Easton just shook his head slowly. "No," he said, not aggressively, just a simple, firm statement of fact. "We will not be doing that." "This is insubordination," she hissed. "No," Easton said again. "This is us adhering to our contracts and to a reasonable, healthy work-life balance. We have identified the problems as requested. We have proposed a solution. We have done our jobs. We will be back tomorrow at 9 to continue doing our jobs." He turned to leave. She was practically vibrating with fury. "If this DLC fails," she said, her voice low and threatening, "it will be on you. I will make sure everyone knows you 3 sabotaged this project." Tony, who had been silent this whole time, finally spoke up. "How can we sabotage something that was never designed to work in the first place?" he asked. And with that, we walked out. We left her standing there, alone, in the middle of the office. The next day, Wednesday, was surreal. We came in at 9, as promised. Ivana was already there. She looked like she hadn't slept. Her hair was a mess, and her eyes were bloodshot. She didn't speak to us. She just sat in her office with the door closed. We spent the day working on our assigned low-priority tasks, all while the broken DLC build sat there on the server, a ticking time bomb. We heard from the night cleaner the next day that she had been there until at least midnight. He said she was in the main dev area, at my computer, just staring at the screen. Not typing, just staring and clicking the mouse occasionally. She had actually tried to fix it herself. The thought was almost comical. She, who couldn't tell the difference between Java and JavaScript, thought she could wade into our codebase and fix a catastrophic architectural failure. It was the ultimate role reversal. The manager who thought our work was just about logic and structure was now face to face with the reality of it, and she was utterly, hopelessly lost. Thursday was a ghost town. Ivana didn't come in. She sent a single terse email to the whole team. "The launch is proceeding as scheduled tomorrow. Be ready." Myra and May were getting nervous. They had started to see the negative chatter in the community about the game's recent instability. They quietly asked me if the DLC was ready. I gave them the honest, professional answer. "We have submitted a report to Ivana detailing a number of critical bugs. We are awaiting her instructions on how to proceed." I didn't throw anyone under the bus. I just stated the facts. Friday arrived, launch day. The three of us went about our normal work. We didn't touch the DLC build. We had no instructions to do so. At midday, an automated notification popped up. The new DLC had been pushed to the live servers. She had done it. She had pushed the button from home, deploying the broken, non-functional build to our entire player base. A new kind of quiet fell over the office. Then, the storm hit. The official game forums exploded. The subreddit became a wall of angry posts. Our mentions on Twitter were a dumpster fire. It wasn't just buggy, it was a catastrophe. The DLC was corrupting players' save files, deleting their characters. People who had spent hundreds of hours in our game were losing everything. The new zone was causing people's graphics cards to overheat. The game was crashing so frequently that it was literally unplayable. Our Steam review score, which had been a respectable, mostly positive, plummeted to overwhelmingly negative in the space of about 6 hours. It was a complete, unmitigated, public disaster. Myra and May were in shock. They were watching the community they had helped build turn on them, their beautiful art and story being blamed for destroying the game. We just kept working, documenting the new bugs as they were reported by players, answering no questions, offering no solutions, just doing our jobs. The following Monday morning, the director showed up, the founder and head of the whole studio. He wasn't one of the publisher suits. He was an old-school programmer who had started the company in his garage 20 years ago. He was quiet, serious, and he did not suffer fools. He called everyone into the main conference room. Ivana was there. She had her game face on, dressed impeccably, looking calm and collected. It was quite a performance. The director didn't waste time with pleasantries. He just looked at Ivana and said, "Explain." Ivana stood up and launched into her pre-prepared speech. It was a masterwork of corporate deflection. She talked about how the male members of the programming team had been resistant to her leadership from day one. She said they had a toxic, exclusionary attitude and had fostered a hostile work environment. She claimed that when she tried to empower the female creatives, the men felt threatened and began to deliberately underperform. She concluded by saying that the disastrous launch was a clear act of calculated sabotage by a disgruntled team that couldn't handle a strong woman in charge. She sat down, looking confident, as if she had just checkmated us. The director listened to her entire speech without interrupting. His expression never changed. When she was finished, he didn't even look at her. He turned his gaze to Easton. "Easton," he said, "what's your side of the story?" Easton didn't stand up. He didn't raise his voice. He just reached into his bag, pulled out a thick spiral-bound folder, and slid it across the conference table. "We don't have a side, sir," Easton said. "We have documentation." The director opened the folder. Inside was everything. Every email, every task assignment, every ignored warning about technical debt, every report we had ever filed, our detailed analysis of the broken DLC, Ivana's written refusal to grant us time for the engine overhaul, the record of our hours worked versus the hours worked by the creative team. It was a cold, factual, undeniable timeline of her incompetence and our attempts to do our jobs professionally within the dysfunctional system she had created. The director read through it for what felt like an eternity. The only sound in the room was the quiet flipping of pages. Ivana's confident facade began to crack. A faint sheen of sweat appeared on her forehead. Myra and May just stared at the table, looking like they wanted to disappear. Finally, the director closed the folder. He looked up, first at Ivana. "The game is broken," he said, his voice flat. "The engine is a mess. The player data is corrupted. Can you fix it?" Ivana opened her mouth, then closed it. She had no answer. "No," she finally whispered. Then he looked at Myra and May. "Can you two fix it?" They both shook their heads, looking terrified. Finally, he looked at Easton, at me, at Tony. "Can you three fix it?" Easton looked him straight in the eye. "Yes," he said, "we can, but it will take time. We'll have to roll back the servers, restore the old build, and then start rebuilding the DLC from the ground up, the right way." The director nodded slowly. He stood up. "Okay," he said. He looked at Ivana one last time. "You're fired," he said. "Your access will be revoked in 5 minutes. Please have security escort you out." There was no yelling, no dramatic scene, just a quiet, efficient execution. Ivana just sat there, stunned into silence as the director turned and walked out of the room. That was it. It was over. That night, for the first time in months, the three of us stayed late. Not because anyone told us to, but because we wanted to. We ordered pizzas, put on some music, and got to work. We started the long, painstaking process of cleaning up the mess. It felt good. It felt like we were taking our game back. The office went back to the way it was before. Tasks were assigned based on skill. Everyone's input was valued. We were one team again. It took us 2 months to fix the game and properly rebuild the DLC. When we finally released it, it was a success. The players loved it. Our review scores climbed back up. We never heard from Ivana again. But her story became a quiet legend in our studio, a cautionary tale about what happens when ideology is valued more than competence. A story about a boss who broke a perfectly good team, and how that team, by simply doing their jobs, broke her in return.